All right, so today we're diving into something that I think is pretty important to a lot of people out there, especially these days.
Yeah.
Eviction. And specifically, we're looking at it from the renter side of things here in California.
Right.
So we're going to be taking a look at the Rent Control Act and the Tenant Protection Act, and really kind of breaking down what those mean for you as a tenant.
That's right.
So think of this as like a guide to what you need to know if you ever find yourself in a sticky situation.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of people, when they get that eviction notice, they just feel so lost, right? They don't even know where to turn or what to do or what their rights are.
Right.
So we're going to lay it all out for you today.
Exactly.
And you know, one of the things that's been a real game changer for tenants is the Tenant Protection Act of 2019.
Right, the TPA.
Yes, the TTA. It's a mouthful.
It is.
But it's really important because it sets this statewide standard for protecting renters, especially those who've been in their homes for a while.
Yeah, at least a year, right?
Yeah, at least 12 months.
Right.
And the thing is, like, even though it's a statewide thing, a lot of local areas, they have their own additional ordinances.
Yeah.
And those can be even stronger.
Right. So, for example, if you're listening to this and you happen to be in, like, Orange County or Riverside, San Diego, Los Angeles, there might be even more protections for you at that local level.
Absolutely. And don't forget about your lease agreement, too.
Oh, yeah.
That can have some extra goodies in there, too.
Right. It's all about those layers.
There's the protection, yeah.
Exactly. So what we're going to really focus on today is this concept of just cause eviction.
Right.
Which the TPA introduced.
Huge change.
Huge, yeah. So we're going to walk you through, like, what that even means. Like, what qualifies as just cause, what doesn't. We're going to talk about the legal steps in an eviction process so you know what to expect.
Right.
And we'll even talk about what you can do if you think you've been wrongfully evicted.
Exactly. We're going to give you the tools to fight back.
Yes. So let's jump right into it.
Let's do it.
This just cause thing seems pretty key, right?
It is.
It's like the foundation of the TPA, especially if you've been in your place for, 12 months or more.
Yeah.
So what does it actually mean in plain English?
Okay, so basically, before the TPA landlords in California, they had a lot more leeway to just end a tenancy pretty much whenever.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a different time. But now with the TPA, especially for those long-term tenants, they have to have a solid, legally recognized reason to evict you.
Okay.
They can't just kick you out because they feel like it.
Right, so it's not just a whim anymore.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's a big shift.
It is a huge shift.
And how does the Act define just cause? Like, what are the specifics?
So it gets really interesting here because the TPA splits it up into two categories.
Okay.
At-fault reasons and no-fault reasons.
Okay, so at fault meaning like the tenant did something wrong.
Exactly.
And no fault meaning...
It's more on the landlord's side.
Gotcha, okay.
So let's start with the at-fault reasons because I think those are probably the ones that people are most familiar with.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So obviously the biggest one is failure to pay rent.
Right, if you don't pay your rent, you got to go.
You got to go. That's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
But then there's also this thing called breach of a material term of the lease.
Okay, what does that mean?
So this is where you violated something really important in your lease agreement.
Yeah.
Like if your lease says absolutely no pets and you bring in like a whole pack of dogs.
Okay, so it's got to be something pretty significant.
Right. It's got to be something that really affects the agreement.
Gotcha.
Then there's creating a nuisance.
Okay, so like being a really bad neighbor?
Basically, yeah, like constantly having loud parties or doing things that really disturb the peace.
Right, right. So it's not just like, your normal everyday living noises.
Exactly. It's got to be beyond that.
Okay.
And then we have causing waste to the property.
Okay, so like trashing the place.
Oh, yeah, damaging it beyond what would be considered normal wear and tear.
Got it. So like punching holes in the walls or something?
Yeah, something like that. And finally, there's using the unit for unlawful purposes.
Okay, so criminal activity.
Pretty much, yeah, like running a drug operation out of your apartment.
Right, right. So those all seem like, pretty justifiable reasons to evict someone?
Yeah, I think most people would agree with that.
Okay, so those are the at-fault reasons.
Now let's move on to the no-fault ones.
Okay, so these are situations where it's not really the tenant's fault.
Exactly. It's more about what the landlord wants to do with the property.
Okay.
So a common one is if the landlord or their immediate family wants to move into the unit.
So like there's spouse or kids or parents.
Yeah, exactly. Immediate family.
Okay.
And they have to actually live there as their primary residence.
They can't just like say they're going to move in and then rent it out to someone else.
Right. It's got to be legit.
Okay.
Then there's this thing called the Ellis Act.
Okay. I've heard of that, but I don't really know what it is.
So the Ellis Act is this California law that lets landlords basically get out of the rental business.
So they can just like sell the property?
Well, it's a little more complicated than that. There are certain rules and requirements they have to follow.
Right.
But essentially, it allows them to evict tenants even if they haven't done anything wrong.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a controversial one for sure.
Okay.
And finally, there's demolition or substantial remodel.
Okay, so if the landlord wants to like tear down the building or do a major renovation.
Exactly, and they have to have the proper permits and everything. And the renovation has to be so extensive that you can't live there during the work.
Gotcha. So they're not just like repainting and kicking you out.
No, it's got to be a major overhaul.
Okay, so those are the no-fault reasons.
Yep.
Wow. It's amazing how much the TPA really changed things.
It really did.
Like you said before, landlords used to be able to just not renew a lease for any reason.
Yeah, pretty much.
And now they need one of these specific just cause reasons.
Exactly, especially for those tenants who've been there for a year or more.
Right. It gives renters a lot more security.
Definitely.
And that was the whole point of the TPA, wasn't it?
Yeah, one of the main goals was to prevent those huge rent increases that were driving people out of their homes.
And just create more stability in general.
Absolutely, because when you're constantly worried about getting evicted, it's hard to put down roots.
Right. It's hard to build a life.
Exactly.
And for the no-fault evictions, does the landlord have to do anything to help the tenant who's being forced to move?
That's a good question, and the answer is it depends.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, I know, but under the TPA, in certain no-fault cases, the landlord might have to provide relocation assistance.
Okay, so like what does that look like?
Well, it could be financial help to cover moving costs, or it could be help finding a new place to live.
So is that just like, here's your eviction notice, see?
Right. There's some responsibility on the landlord's part.
Okay, that's
But the specifics can vary depending on the local ordinances, too.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So it's important to know what applies in your area.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's say I'm a tenant, and I get this notice that seems like my landlord wants me out.
Okay.
What should I do first?
All right, first things first, don't panic.
Easier said than done.
I know, but seriously, read that notice carefully.
Like really careful?
Like with a magnifying glass if you have to.
Okay.
Pay attention to why they're saying you have to leave and what the deadline is.
Right, so don't just like skim it and toss it aside.
No, this is important stuff.
So, yeah.
Because depending on the reason, there might be things you can do to fix the situation.
Okay, so like if it's about unpaid rent.
Exactly. Pay it as soon as possible.
Right.
Or if you accidentally violated some minor lease term.
Like you had a goldfish even though it said no pets.
Yeah, something like that. Try to rectify the situation.
Okay.
The key is to act quickly.
Don't just ignore it.
Absolutely. Not ignoring it is the worst thing you can do.
Okay, what else should I be doing besides trying to fix the problem?
Documentation is your best friend.
Okay, write down the date you got the notice. Keep copies of any emails or text messages.
Anything
Related to the eviction.
Got it.
Because you never know when you might need that paper trail.
Right. It's like your evidence.
Exactly.
Okay, so document everything. What else?
And this is crucial. Talk to a lawyer.
Okay.
Like as soon as possible.
Right.
Because they can tell you what your rights are and what your options are.
So they can like help me navigate this whole legal maze.
Exactly.
Okay, so I read the notice. I'm documenting everything. I'm talking to a lawyer.
You're on the right track.
What happens if I don't do what the notice says, or if I can't fix the problem in time?
Well, if that happens, the landlord can take you to court.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it's called an unlawful detainer lawsuit.
So that's like the official legal term for an eviction lawsuit.
Exactly.
Okay.
And they have to formally serve you with a summons and a complaint.
So like official court documents.
Yeah.
And then what?
Then you have a very limited time to respond, usually only 5 to 15 days. That's not a lot of time.
No, it's not. And it depends on how you were served. But either way, you got to act fast.
Okay. And what do I have to do within that time?
You have to file a written response with the court.
Okay, so like my side of the story.
Exactly why you think the eviction is wrong.
And if I don't do that?
If you don't respond in time, the landlord can get a default judgment.
Oh, man.
Yeah, which means they basically win automatically.
So I could get evicted without even having a chance to defend myself.
That's the danger of not responding.
Okay, so I definitely need to file that response.
Absolutely.
And now what happens?
If you file a response, the court will usually set a trial date.
So we go in front of a judge.
Exactly. And you can present your arguments and evidence.
Okay, and let's say after all that the landlord wins.
Okay.
What's the final step in the actual eviction?
So if the landlord wins, they get what's called writ of execution.
Okay.
And that basically gives the sheriff the power to evict you.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they'll serve you with a notice to vacate.
And how long do I have to get out then?
5 days.
5 days, that's it.
That's it. And if you're not out by then, the sheriff can physically remove you.
Wow, that's scary.
It is a serious process.
Okay, but what if I think the eviction notice was totally bogus? Like the landlord is just making stuff up.
You have options.
Okay.
First and foremost, file that response to the lawsuit.
Right. I remember that's crucial.
It is, and in your response, you lay out exactly why you think the eviction is unlawful.
Okay.
Maybe they don't have just cause. Maybe they didn't serve you properly.
Or maybe they're just retaliating because I complained about something.
Exactly. Retaliation is illegal.
Good to know.
And once again, get a lawyer involved.
Right. They can help me build my case.
Exactly.
Right.
They know the ins and outs of the law.
Okay, and while I'm doing all this, should I be like saving every email and text message?
Absolutely. Keep those records meticulous.
Right. Documentation is key.
It's your proof.
Okay, so we've talked about the legal process, but sometimes landlords try to take shortcuts, right?
Unfortunately, yeah, we see that sometimes.
Like they try to kick you out without going through the courts.
Exactly. It's called self-help eviction, and it's completely illegal.
Okay, so what are some examples of that?
Well, changing the locks while you're still living there, that's a big one.
Oh, wow.
Or shutting off your utilities like water or electricity.
That's messed up.
It's a serious violation of your rights.
And they can't just throw my stuff out on the street, right?
Nope, not without a court order.
Okay, good to know.
And any kind of threats or intimidation, that's also illegal.
So they can't like stand outside my door banging pots and pans?
No, they have to follow the legal process.
Okay, so what happens to a landlord who tries to pull this self-help stuff?
They can get in big trouble.
Like how big?
They could have to pay you damages.
Okay.
Like your actual financial losses from the illegal eviction.
So like if I had to stay in a hotel?
Exactly. Or if they damaged your belongings. Plus, they could get hit with punitive damages.
What are those?
Those are meant to punish them for their actions.
So it's like a slap on the wrist.
More like a punch in the wallet.
Okay. Ouch.
And they might have to pay your lawyer's fees, too.
Wow. So it's really not worth it for them to try any funny business.
Nope, the law's on your side.
Okay, good to know.
Yep.
So we've talked about the TPA, which is a statewide law.
Right.
But you mentioned earlier that there might be local laws that offer even more protection.
Exactly. Cities and counties can have their own ordinances.
And those can be stricter than the state law.
They can be.
Okay, so what kind of things might a local ordinance cover?
Well, they might have a more specific definition of just cause.
Okay.
So it's even harder for a landlord to evict you.
Gotcha.
Or they might require longer notice periods.
So I'd have more time to find a new place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And some places have really robust relocation assistance programs.
Wow. So it really varies from place to place.
It does.
Okay, so if I'm renting in like Orange County, I need to know both the state law and the local law.
Absolutely. You got to do your research.
And what about my lease agreement? Does that come into play too?
Oh, yeah. Your lease can actually have extra protections in it.
Really?
Yeah, if it has more restrictive rules for eviction than the state or local laws.
So the lease can be even better for me than the law.
It can be.
Wow. That's good to know.
It's all about those layers of protection.
Right. So it's really important to read your lease carefully.
Absolutely. Don't just sign it without understanding it.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today.
Well, yeah.
What would you say is the most important thing for tenants to remember?
I think the key takeaway is that you have rights. The TPA is a powerful tool for protecting renters.
Especially those long-term tenants.
Exactly.
And if you do get an eviction notice, don't panic.
Right.
Read it carefully.
Right.
Document everything and talk to a lawyer.
Those are your first steps.
Okay.
And remember, local laws and your lease can offer extra protection too.
Right. So it's all about being informed.
Exactly. Knowledge is power.
Exactly. So here's something to think about as we wrap up. With all these different laws and rules and your lease agreement, how can you make sure you're always up to date on your rights?
That's a good question.
Like, what can you do proactively to stay informed and empowered as a renter?
Right.
It's definitely something to consider.
It is, because the laws can change and you don't want to be caught off guard.
Call now 714-442-9741. Thank you.